those wonderful words. We're a positive path for spiritual living. That's what we focus on. Let me ask you something. How many of you receive and or especially read the newsletter? Actually read it? Very good. Yeah, so you know something about what I'm going to talk about today. Let me ask you one more question. How many were here on September the 26th, 2021, when I came for my interview lesson? Yeah, there was some of you, but there was only about 30 altogether. So, and we had a lot of new people here, so a lot of people didn't hear what we were talking about today. So I was talking about that I had been searching for a new spiritual home for about 2 years, maybe more. You know, at this age, I said, you know, I could really use a new adventure. And I saw the ad in the Unity Worldwide Ministries about Unity Georgetown's looking for a minister. And I said, so I applied. And they sent me the packet. And it says, what we're looking for in a minister. And it's something like forward-thinking, open-minding, questioning, all these kinds of things. And it says, in a sense of humor. And I said, hey. Unity Georgetown is looking for me. So they called me and we did a Zoom interview and then they said, come on up, we want to talk to you in person. Okay. So I thinking, what should I talk about? And so to challenge you, whether you really wanted a minister with a sense of humor and forward thinking, I decided on a lesson that, well, you'll see. Before finding Unity, my Sunday morning spiritual experience was out there at the golf course. Not this one, but back home. And, you know, it was out there being guys being guys, and getting ready for the games that start at noon. That was my spiritual experience. And I call it that because Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore said that we are living in a spiritual universe. And if we are, then in some sense or another, everything we do is spiritual. There's nothing else. So I said, I can do that. And so I decided on at the time I can imagine somebody asking me, hey man, we're going to go to church. Let's not play golf Sunday. We're going to go to church. You want to go? I would have gone like, huh? Church? Who needs it? That would have been my question. And as it turns out, it seems like more and more people are saying the same thing these days, especially the young people. I'm not talking about just Unity. I'm talking about across the board, all religions. So the answer to who needs church is apparently less and less people do, or so they think, and that is the topic of today. Now, there's a lot of really important issues going on with church these days, not the least of which is attendance. There has been a steady decline in church attendance for 80 years now. There really has. The young people of today are the first generation of young people who come from parents who didn't go to church. So we're already in the second generation of non-church goers. Just recently, we dropped below 50% for the first time in America's history. There are more people who don't go to church than there are people who do. Now, what do you suppose are the chances of turning that around? The trend doesn't seem to indicate any chances of that happening, especially given that all the religions are promoting the same old story that the people were leaving in the first place. And so last week, Therese sent me an article, and it said that last year, something like 1,700 churches closed across America. So some people think that the way to go forward is to go back to the old ways of doing things. And I said, really? That's the answer? Going back is how you go forward? That sounds a lot to me like, you know, more guns are the way to peace. I say, sure, that's the answer. The biblical saying for this is, like begets like. That's kind of like the law of attraction it's saying there. And in case, what kind of explanation then do we come up with for this decline? And I say that our consciousness is no longer in tune with that old story. My first forward-thinking move as a minister of Unity Church of Georgetown was to suggest that we drop the word church. And so everybody really jumped on board and said, yeah, let's do that. And it kind of confirmed to me that I really am in the right place. And then when we got together with the Let's Get Metaphysical group and I started to meet it with you and talk to you more, I really saw how forward thinking, how you want to take this all into a whole nother level of understanding. And I said, I truly am in the right place. So this is what people tell me about Unity Georgetown, is that it is different. There are tons of churches out there. Right here on Williams, there's a bunch of big churches. We can't find a little one. And there's a bunch of big churches. On 29, there's a bunch of them. Downtown, there's big churches. And none of them are like us. We are truly unique. So I tell people, we have to understand that the people who are seeking us are not really necessarily seeking a church per se. And so we talk about the importance of words. So it's not about semantics. It really is about that energy that comes up from the subconscious when you go back to the old way of thinking. And for us, we're looking for something back. And it was really different when I grew up. I'm sure you too. Back then, we went to church, period. That's the way it was. And when I think back about why we went to church, now these are the residual thoughts of a child when I was a child. And there was two reasons. One, because, well, that's where God was. You want to talk to God? Go to church. But it wasn't really that simple. Because you didn't go to church to talk to God. You talked to the priest, who would then turn to God. Because, wait a minute, you're not qualified. You do not have the credentials to be talking to God, all right? And when you think about it, really that's representative of that old Jewish temple view, that you would go for offering to the Jewish temple, and you would present your offering, but it would go to the high priest, and the high priest would do it in their secret room. You're not allowed back there. That's where they're talking to God, see? So that's how it was. And the second reason was because we were concerned about our eternal future. This is a big deal. When you're told that there's only two options after you pass away. Two options. And mainstream religion has dropped the God is in church thing so much, but not so much about your options, about your eternity. I don't know if there are here, but down where I live, there's billboards all over the place. If you die tonight, where will you spend eternity? When I was in Unity, I wrote some op-eds to the newspaper, and they actually printed them. And one of them was called, "Is Eternity Eternal?" That's my Socrates influence, And because a lot of people have the idea that eternity has a starting point. At some point, maybe basically when you were born, but more specifically when you died. Their eternity now starts. And I used to say, so I ended the article with saying, so next time somebody asks you, where are you going to spend eternity? Just say, I don't know, but whatever it is, I'm already there. Look up the definition. Then I started reading some New Thought stuff, and there was this lady, Nona Brooks, and she was the leader, the founder of a New Thought small church called Church of Divine Science at the time. And she wrote something that really caught my attention. She said, "We are living in eternity now." And I went, wow, we are living in eternity. It doesn't start and stop. We're in it all over the place. Anyway, new science, and we're really into new science, quantum physics and stuff in the LGM group. And it's telling us that we used to think that there was empty space between things, that everything was separate. Science used to. And now they're knowing that, in fact, there is no empty space between anything. Everything is fundamentally connected. Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics, said this: "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a consciousness and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." This is the father of quantum physics. And the Bible says basically the same thing, but in different language. Can you imagine Max Planck telling that to the disciples? They're going to go, what? What are you talking about? But perhaps Jesus knew these things. Because in John 16:12, he wrote, "I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear." Interesting. Was he talking about quantum physics? Maybe. So this brings me to another point of the lesson. The first being about declining church attendance, and the second is about our unique interpretation of spirituality. Last week, I talked about the greatest story ever told, which is traditional view of Christianity, and then the greatest story never told, which is our new thought, unique way of looking at it. And what did I say about the two stories? As different as they seem to us, it's the same story, the identical story. The difference is in how we interpret it. We talk about something called spiral dynamics in unity, and it's that our conscious unfolding is kind of a spiraling up and up. And so every time you're always growing, and you're always running into kind of the same problems. You kind of figure things out. But every time you see it from new higher elevation. And so that's what we're talking about in unity when we say that we have a metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. So what does that mean? Well, it means that as a spiritual book, the Bible is not so much the literal stories or events or people found in the pages. It is the spiritual significance behind the events, the people, and all the things that are going on in the Bible that is the true meaning. And a better description of metaphysical interpretation, I think, would be an allegorical interpretation. And this is why it says allegory, a representation of an abstract or spiritual meaning through concrete or material forms, a symbolic narrative. The problem is a literal translation makes God too small. It just does. And so we see stories from a different point of view. And I say this all the time. If the Bible is literal, then it's about some people. But if it's allegorical, then it's about all people. It's a story about us. It's a story about me. It's a story about you. That makes it a whole different thing. Now it's really personal, about our spiritual journey. And so all of this, what is the connection between the two stories, the greatest ever told and the greatest never told? And that is that we are being told that this stuff that we call God took the form of humanity, or of a man, for tradition. In the old Hebrew scriptures, it says, Emmanuel, God with us, that God became flesh and made his dwelling among us, John 1:14. Unity would agree with this. The difference would be, we would alter that to say that God took and expresses itself as all of creation. All of creation. Why? Because we're told that God is all-powerful, everywhere present, and knows everything. And what does that make God then? It makes it everything. There is nothing but God. That's a different way of looking at things. The traditional view sees Jesus as the only one, but that's an extremely limiting description of what God would be. Let's take a simple example of the topic, seen from a higher consciousness that can entirely change how we see the topic. That's the point of this story. It is the example of Santa Claus. We all know the literal story of Santa Claus. But what is the spiritual significance of Santa Claus? What is the idea behind it? As human children, we had no problem believing in the story of Santa. We were perfectly fine with it. And we believed it for whatever period of time. I don't know how long it is. What do you think, 3, 4 years, 5 years? I don't know, whatever it is. We believed it. And then at some point, we start questioning the story. It might have been something like, are you trying to tell me that this one man literally goes to every house on the planet in this one evening? How can that possibly be? The seeker is born. You start asking questions. Same thing may have happened to you along your spiritual journey. When you were young, you might have asked questions like, how is it possible that God only revealed itself to one group of people? And this one group of people happened to be the ones who wrote the story. How does that work? There's a lot of questions. Let's try another one. How does a loving God send someone to eternal damnation for one short period of time, maybe 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever it might be? How does a one-size-fits-all religion work given all the infinite circumstances of human lives. How do these things work? There are no sensible answers to it from the traditional perspective. So I think that's part of the grand exodus of the traditional church. But it has resulted in throwing out the baby with the bathwater. That's the problem. Now work with me on this Santa thing. What happened in the Santa story? That is what's happening right now in a church attendance. We no longer believe the story because our consciousness doesn't believe the Santa story literally anymore. But we don't have anything to replace it with spiritually. So we discarded the whole thing. People are going for, I don't believe in that in the religious traditional view of things. So therefore, let's go to the other side. There is no God. And for us, it's like, hold on a minute. There's another way of looking at this. And so this has created a big void in the lives of people because we are spiritual by nature. And because we're spiritual by nature, we need to be in a spiritual community. But it's got to be one that resonates with us. So this is part 2, the transformation. As I said, the parallel between the two stories continues. Now, from a higher perspective, look at what happens. The story of Santa starts as a man doing something that seemed impossible, delivering toys to all the children of the world in one evening. If taken literally, it is impossible. It is not true. However, if taken allegorically or metaphysically, we would say it is not only possible, but it's absolutely true. When we abandon this impossibility, then we start seeing things differently. And so with Santa, as adults, we saw it from a different perspective. And we no longer thought about a man literally doing this anymore. And then it starts to make sense again, the story, from another level. And what is the idea behind Santa? It is the spirit of giving. That is what Santa represents, the spirit of giving. And can the spirit of giving give throughout the entire planet on any one given night? It absolutely can. So the story was always true, but it wasn't true literally. You had to rise to a higher consciousness to see it for what it really means. And so what do you suppose is a spiritual example as well? The same thing. There was a time when we as spiritual children, our consciousness allowed us to believe that old story. But then we began to unfold and to question it, and it didn't make sense anymore. So we abandoned it. But for people in unity, they're starting to see it from a different perspective, from a higher consciousness, and thus the transformation. It was never about a literal story. It was always about a conceptual story. And from that perspective, it does make sense. Yes, God did take the form of a man, but it was never about a man. It was always about an idea. And that idea is that divinity within everyone and everything. That is the niche of the message that is unity. And the message we need to share with those who are seeking it. A whole new way of seeing the old story from a higher elevation. So who needs church? From that elevation, from that consciousness, we all do. I invite you now to take a few moments to reflect and contemplate today's message. It truly is the good news. It is a universal and eternal message about our divinity and our place and purpose in this world. We are grateful for the awakening taking place in our hearts and in our minds. We remain ever open to new ways of understanding as we forever birth a greater reality. In our continual conscious unfolding, both as individuals and as a community, as a spiritual community, we lovingly and willingly share this new message that people have left behind because it didn't make sense to them. The story is about universal love and universal acceptance. For those who seek this new understanding, we offer our spiritual home to them. Emmanuel, God with us and God as us. Each one of us as an individual expression of the infinite oneness. And so it is.